One of the things that's underappreciated about Little Wargame is that, in fact, there are 3 separate factions, but all players have access to all the units of each faction when they start the game. This has powerful implications that only now people are beginning to realize, as factionalization is going away, and hybridization, or the Human Special, as it was previously called, is starting to become more and more incorporated. We've seen games that have Ballista Dragons and Catapults. We've seen games that have Archer Wolf. We've seen games, of course, where Catapults get snuck into a rack-style army composition, and mages that go in with beast players. All of these excellent things that happen and involve in hybridization. But this isn't a video about that topic. This is a video about the topic of as follows. Most people pick a faction, that's the faction that they stick with, and they stick with it continuously, as if it were one of these other games like Age of Empires or StarCraft or Rise of Nations, where once you pick your faction, that is the only faction you can play. You cannot play with units outside of that faction. These are all the things that you have. The balance is contained within the units that are in here, and if something is overpowered or can't be handled or you don't have a good counter to it, then you either have to learn and improve and get better, or recognize that that is of lower tier, lower quality, not sufficient, or not competitive, and dump it and move on to a stronger faction. But in Little Wargame, the factions aren't races. They're not split up. You can play as any of them, but we still have this idea of separating people based on their factional play. Here's the big implication that comes from that. We tell people all the time, hey, when they're asking, how should I play? What should I play? What style should I play? And this is the idea that I want to present, which is as follows. Each faction has a different skill set that they will teach you, and there is a natural learning path and growth as a player when you play all the factions in the Little Wargame. It goes as follows. When you're a beginning, now, I'm going to start off right now. This is a mental model for how to see the factions in the Little Wargame. We're going to get into some of the examples that are counter to this, or to emphasize at the beginning, this does not mean that if you don't follow this trend, you're wrong. And it doesn't mean that I believe that this is ground set in stone and this is the way that you must play in order to improve. What this is a mental model of how you view what the strengths are of the factions, what they most naturally encourage, and then what they encourage in the growth of a player as if they were being coached by the game itself. They're just not being told it forcefully or directly, but it's the implication of the way that everything is played. So, if you're brand new to real-time strategy games, you have no idea how to make units, the idea of macro is only something that happens for economics, same thing for micro, and your ideal base count is somewhere between 1 and 1, then you should play racks. The reason you should play racks is as follows. Rax units are slow, yes, but Rax units are, with some exceptions, Rax units are very hardy. Rax units have a little bit of micro potential in them, but not so much that they require constant coddling and manual control. You think of the soldier and the archer. These units, yes, at high levels of play, they could be required to go out and then back and then mini-map awareness and all of this. For a brand new player who doesn't concern themselves with a mini-map and has a base count, as I said, that's something between 1 and 1, if you want to get started with a race or a faction that encourages you, take an expansion, make a bunch of people, group them together, and send them on an A move. You don't have to control them, you don't have to micro them, you don't have to split them off, you don't have to do multi-pronged attack. You just want to see how units move and attack, and you want to be solid and sturdy, then this is why you encourage brand new people to play Rax. Think of all the things that Rax comes with it. Soldier Archer, very tanky relative to other factions. Additionally, pretty solid basic units. How do you counter air units? Archers. How do you counter ground units that want to surround your archers? Soldiers. There's a little bit of micro potential in there with units such as the Raider, and there's a little bit of room to feel pizzazzy and have like you've got something going on with priests and mages. Priests can make things invisible. This is an immediate, obvious effect that any new player can recognize. If my units are invisible, you can't see them and they can damage you. What about the mage? Mage has a fireball. How could that not just do damage? It directly communicates what it's supposed to do. The player understands what it does. The controls are fairly simple for both of them, and they're quite gracious on both of them as well. You look at the other Rax units, and you just think, okay, workers get their upgrades. There's some upgrades. There's some tech that you can unlock. Pretty simple. All I have to do, make barracks, don't ever have to upgrade the barracks, and I just append additional tech on top of it. And this creates a very layered pyramid structure for a new player. If they've never heard of macro, then they don't have to worry because they don't need as much macro to have a great number of hit points and attacking potential as Rax units. If they've never heard as micro, then they won't succeed at a very high level with their Rax play, but at a beginning level, they'll crush a beginner level beast player or a beginner level mech player because all they have to do is send their units on a move. The other players have to worry about pullback micro and multi-pronged attacks, and their macro has to be strong and then they have to know about repair and how about positioning and buildings. But a starting off player doesn't need to know about any of those things, and so Racks is what we encourage newer players to play. Now, this is the point of the video. That's not really contentious. This is something that we tell people. We haven't really explicated why we tell them that, but I think that I've made a good case for it. This is the next level of it. What do you tell intermediate players? You tell intermediate players, I believe, play Beast. Now, you tell them to play Beast because the natural strengths that that player will have and that they need to grow on to improve as a player are naturally found in the Beast faction. So when you think about Racks, what do you think? If you're a more skilled player, you think slow, plodding, very reserved movement. You're starting to face off against people who themselves have more macro and more base knowledge and awareness. And so it's getting a little bit harder. You can't just A-move to victory anymore the way that you used to. And you kind of feel like, these units feel a little bit lacking. I like the way the Raider moves, and some of the spellcasters are kind of interesting, but I don't feel like it can get much utility out of these units either. Then Little Wargame encourages you, and the structure of the factions encourages you to play Beast next. Beast is for intermediate players. Intermediate players are starting to learn the value of map control, of map presence, of scouting. They use their mini-map. So if you're used to using multiple layers of function keys or command groups or control groups or camera hotkeys, then the Beast player will be more rewarded for doing that. The units are faster. You've played with the slow plotting Racks units, so now you understand the benefit of having fast mobile units. The idea of what Beast players communicate what their units communicate isn't as easily understood. So the Wolf, I think that's a melee unit. That makes sense, and it's fast. Okay, that's cool. And they go in packed. That thematically makes sense. Snakes being a DPS unit, that's a little bit odd, and it doesn't make too much sense. Dragons should be like this giant, heavy, fire-breathing, but they're mostly useful for their AoE, and they're not even the most strong, powerful unit in the air, and they have to be controlled very precisely against units like Ballista, and to a lesser extent, Gyrocraft. Think about the werewolf. What do you expect the werewolf to be? Well, it looks really big and it has a big mace, so I guess it's tanky, courtesy of its design. You find out exactly the limits of how tanky it is, and then you look at the buildings. You have to upgrade, you have to get, sidereal tech. Okay, that makes sense. We've done the same thing for getting mages in Racks play by getting the Mages Guild, and now we've unlocked the barracks. Much the same way, you can get a snake charmer, and it unlocks the ability to make snakes in the wolf's den. But if you ever want to make werewolves, you've got to go ahead and upgrade this den into a werewolf's den. It's a completely new building. That's not something that Racks units ever do. Or you need a fortress. I didn't even know a fortress existed until I started playing Beast, you might say. But now you know because you need them to make dragons. You become understanding of how to convert map control advantages into a longer win. Whereas with the Racks player, as a beginning player, you might just say, I'm going to move across the map, and if I kill the player, then they're dead, and I win the game. And if I lose my army, well, I guess I'll try again. If you're the Beast player, you recognize if I lose my entire army, then everything goes really badly for me. But if I can control where his army goes, where my opponent's army goes, and make sure that they can't move out, then I have freedom to tech and to expand. And so you start to learn more about the economical aspect of the game. You start to learn and appreciate the value of money, of the value of gold mined, of the small micro intricacies, because now you are encouraged, nay, you are required to attack with wolves and then pull them back. The natural regeneration rate of these Beast units means that you are encouraged to make skirmishes as opposed to the full commitments that you used to make as Racks. And so it's no surprise that as Racks players find more and more difficulty just moving out across the map and killing their opponent, the intermediate Beast player will find more and more natural skill progression as they realize, I've got pullback micro, and I have map control, and this is the understanding of the economy, and this is the way that units work, and this is the advantage of speed. So now we go into the next level. Okay, you're done being an intermediate player. You're starting to reach into expert levels of play. What is the natural skill progression? You might think, I go back into Racks. But no, this is the brilliance of Little Wargame, whether it was designed this way or not. This is the way that it turns out in reality. The way that you improve most directly from there is you play Mech. Now that sounds crazy because Mech has a horrendous matchup against Beast, and Mech, while advantaged against Racks, has a lot to prove to show that they can do it. But think about it. All the pullback small unit micro as Beast, you might be thinking, well, I can do the small pullback micro, but is that really micro? I mean, it is, but it's on a very basic fundamental level, and it is a requirement for playing as Beast, but I want something more. I want to feel like I can get maximum value if I put maximum effort in. And so you look at catapults, these units that have Q firing. You've got easy, natural access to airship drops and catapult drops. Catapult drops you can put in lots of time and effort into learning how to hotkey your airship and your catapults so that the first shot that comes out of the catapults isn't wasted, it lands directly on workers. You know the value of the economy, so you now understand more easily why catapult drops are effective. You start to build up the APM that's required because you've gone from a beginner who moves with racks to an intermediate player who has this pullback micro, to now you're starting to incorporate in mech all of these things. You also start to understand why things in the game can be broken or be very powerful. Repair, as it currently exists in version 4.3.2, is extremely powerful. What it requires you to be aware of when the units can, like pulling the workers, bringing the units out. You have to know the interactions between how you open. Your building placement starts to become very important. Your overall game plan for how you approach a map becomes very important. So, for instance, I keep going back to this. Rhinus versus Prankster Gangster Game 3 was on Game 4, I believe, was on Stream Junction. The power of Stream Junction was that Rhinus, as the mech player against Beast, has a horrendous time on that map. It's very Beast favored. But Rhinus showed, no. You think it's Beast favored. This is the way you have to play. I'm going to set the buildings here. I'm going to set a wall off. I'm going to use these high micro intensive units, like catapults with airships. And I'm going to set caltrops down with all of my Gatling guns. And I'm going to maintain map control over here. And I'm going to funnel all of the choke points in so there's only one attack path. And that's where mech can be successful, whereas Beast wants these open attack paths. And because you start to understand the things that Rax wants to do and then Beast wants to do, you as the mech player can understand it. Let's look at the complexity of the buildings. Rax, fundamentally, you have a barracks. You can make everything you need out of a barracks with the exception of priests. That's perfectly fine. Beast, you've got some like weird leveling up upgrade system that you're going through, and then additionally you have to go pull these units over here, and then you have to like upgrade to castle into a fortress. Let's take a look at mech. When you have mech, you need gyrocrats, you need a build. You want an advanced workshop? Yeah, you're going to need it for those ballista and the airships. Which ones do you make? You're going to have to figure it out. There's also 2 upgrades that are inside of that building. What about the workshop? Also has an upgrade inside of it. It can make a couple of units as well. How about what are these caltrops? How do I make them more effective? You're going to need that speed upgrade. When do I get the speed upgrade? It's up to you. The forge that Rax uses is also used by mech, but you have to figure out, okay, I need +1 because it does bonus damage against the workers, and then I can 2-shot the workers. Okay, do I get armor? Do I get attack? Like, am I going to mix in any of these factions? What if I want to incorporate Slowfield into my play? What time do I get ballistas? What kind of scouting information do I need? When's the timing for my advanced workshop to get the upgrades that it needs for my airships, so that I can see what's going on? And then you have all of the micro that was required of Beast is put on steroids because there is additional micro that's required. For instance, if you're mech, airship micro is now a necessity of the playstyle. Worker micro is now a necessity of the playstyle. Understanding of map awareness for things like caltrops and understanding where you can push out on the map is now essential, because if you push out on the map as mech with a force that's too small or not well scouted, or you haven't sim-citied properly, or you don't bring workers for repair, you don't do any of these things, all of a sudden your army gets swallowed up and you don't get to do the Rax player thing of sitting back and then being a new player again saying, just hold up and then shove out again, because the mech player might actually just be dead if they take that first bad engagement, but the skills of the game have naturally prepared you to play mech. So now I've laid out a case for you start as Rax. The game itself emphasizes and rewards the skill progression of players who go from Rax to Beast to mech. But does that mean that you have to be at those levels? Does that mean that mech is better than Beast and then Beast is better than Rax? No, actually, we've seen plenty of strong players play other races. So AC is a very strong player, plays Beast, definitely has the ability to play mech, chooses not to play mech overwhelmingly. We look at people who used to play more actively, like Slammer 4. This is a person who was starting to switch over to only maining mech. But he fought against Dragon Archer Z, my candidate for the greatest of all time in Little Wargame. And Dragon Archer Z was this person who would play as Rax, which is in theory the weak side of the matchup against mech, and additionally is the first unit group that I put down into the first faction. And yet Dragon Archer Z managed to make that happen and is probably the greatest Little Wargame player of all time. Certainly one of the most dominant, easily in top 3, regardless of what you think otherwise. What faction you play doesn't determine your skill set, but it does make it more or less difficult for you to progress from there. So for instance, if you are a brand new player and you like mech, go play mech. No one's stopping you from playing mech. But if you're a new player who's struggling with macro and some basic micro aspects, that perhaps you would better learn and transition by going off to being a Beast player. You can still play mech, but you will naturally feel yourself handicapped. If you are, however, a strong mechanical player and you want to play racks, you can do that, but understand you've got to incorporate some of the decision making that you would learn by playing mech and some of the map awareness that you would understand by playing Beast in order to fully incorporate all the aspects of that faction that seems to teach on a more basic level, on a lower rung. And again, that's not to say that any of these factions are easier or harder than another. All of them have their difficulties, especially because you can play any of these three factions. You can play all of these three factions. Hybridization and the Human Special, as it used to be known, are increasingly common, and in fact, it's not uncommon to integrate some catapults into your Rax play, or to bring mages into your Beast play, or we even saw a game where dragons were incorporated alongside mech inside of the February Cup tournament. So don't take this as, if you're X level player, you must do Y to ascend. But if you have difficulties understanding why you're stuck at whatever your level is, maybe you need to change up your faction. Find out that there is a faction for every season, and you might be limiting yourself by playing the faction just because it's what you've always played and always known. It might not necessarily be the faction that you need to improve as a player. If you enjoy the content that I make on this channel, or for the Little Wargame RTS channel on Twitch, or throughout any other space that involves Little Wargame, please consider subscribing to the Patreon link in the description box below.